God, we thank you for this day. We thank you that you do come to visit us. Help us to not be so busy when you do visit us that we don't spend time with you, that we don't listen to what you have to say. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, for those that don't know, I try to be in the discipline of doing daily devotions each day, and I keep myself accountable to do them by posting them online. So if you ever go on Facebook, you'll see them there. But typically, most of the time, I follow the Moravian daily text. Yesterday, the readings included Psalm 25 to 27. And a couple of places in Psalm 25 and 27, David said, God, show me your ways. And it made me think, so what's the difference between showing him his ways and just teach me about you? That David is someone who's not just interested in learning things about God, and he's not just interested in learning what he's supposed to do for God, but David is a man after God's own heart. He wants to know God from the inside. He wants to know God's heart. He wants to know the way God sees things. And the older I get, the more I have that same goal in my own life. Yeah, I do want to know things about God. I want to be taught about God. I do want to learn what I'm supposed to do for God, but I'm becoming more interested in just knowing God's ways. Knowing the way God thinks, knowing the way God acts, and starting to love the way that God loves and see the way that God sees. So today, that's what I want to look at, is the difference between being someone who sees God primarily as a teacher to teach us about God, or as a master telling us what we're supposed to do to please God, and to start to see God more as that Father who wants us to know him, that friend who wants to share his heart, share his plans with us, and invite us to be part. So in today's readings, we see both an Old Testament friend of God and a New Testament friend of Jesus. And we see how their priorities might be a little bit different than people who are just interested in being taught about God or just interested in being told what they're supposed to do. Those who actually want to spend time with God. Our Old Testament reading is about Abraham. And what is he known as? A friend of God. So we're going to see how this friend of God interacts with God. That he is looking for more than just information about God. He's looking for more than just being told what he's supposed to do. But he wants to have that conversation, that time with God. And in the New Testament, we're going to look at Mary. That Mary is a friend of Jesus. She's someone who wants more than just to have someone tell her about Jesus. She wants more than just to be busy doing things for Jesus. She wants to actually spend time as close as possible with Jesus. So with that in mind, I was thinking about how often churches have sort of different priorities, different identities. Like you're going to find some churches that say we're a teaching church, which is fantastic. Their focus is, well, we are here to teach you things about God, about the Bible, about faith, and that's what we see to be our primary identity. And I'm glad there are churches like that, but I don't think that's to be our primary identity. And there's lots of churches that will say, we are the church that does. We're the church that's in the community. We're the church that's doing servant things, and we're involved all over the place in the name of Jesus. And it's fantastic because the church should be outside of the walls of the church. We should be in the community. We should be doing things. But once again, that's not our primary identity. We're not the church that knows. We're not the church that does, but we're the church that spends time in the presence of Jesus. And so with that in mind, just want to invite you to be thinking about why you're here. Are you here to get good teaching so you can go home with more head knowledge about God? Hopefully that will happen. Are you here to get some good motivation so you can go home with a list of things that you should do to be a good Christian in the world? Hopefully you'll get some of that. But my hope is that as a congregation that we start to see our primary identity as more than just students of a teacher, more than just servants of a master, but we are friends of God. We're children of God. We're the ones who are people after God's own heart. We want to know what makes God tick from the inside. Because I have a sense that a community of people that actually do spend time at Jesus' feet and listening to what Jesus is saying will actually get to know more about God intellectually than the others. And they will also be the ones who will end up making the most difference in the world. More difference in the world than people that don't spend time at Jesus' feet. So I think the knowing and the doing will come from the experience of being with Jesus. So looking a little bit at our stories for today. Abraham wasn't chosen because he had all of his qualifications right at the beginning. When he was chosen from Ur of the Chaldees to go and be the one that God chose to be part of accomplishing God's purposes, it said that he was an idolater. He wasn't even a worshiper of God at the time he was chosen. But God looked at Abraham and he said, there's something about this guy that I can use. Because he is the kind of person who will be more than just a student. He'll be more than just a servant. He's going to be someone who's going to be a friend. And so you're going to see Abram, because if he's just a student or just a servant, Abram's going to give up. Because he's going to end up going in places where he's going to get discouraged and frustrated. He's going to spend years and years and years hoping or waiting for God's promises that he's going to have this great family that's going to bless the world. It's in that process of that discouragement that Abraham is going to really discover what it means to be a friend of God. But he's going to be somebody who's going to argue with God. He's going to be someone who's going to question God. He's going to be someone who just wants to spend time in God's presence. And in our reading for today, Abram is already, this is already past the time that he's been promised that he's going to have this great family. It's past the time where God has already said that, no, it's not going to be the servant in your household. It's not going to be the one who was born through the slave girl. This is going to be your own child. And so this is like the third time that Abram is visited about having a child. And he's probably very discouraged and very frustrated by now. But as he is there in his tent, he's aware of what's going on around him. At this point, he doesn't know that these three men are God. He just sees three men, and because of who he is, does he just sit there twiddling his thumbs and wave at them as they go by? No, because of who he is, he runs out and he says, okay, he runs out to them and tells them, will you give me the privilege of providing hospitality to you? Which I think that culture, Middle Eastern culture, is much better at hospitality than we are in general. But you see something about Abram, that he runs out there to make sure these guys don't pass. And he goes and prepares this wonderful meal. And he stands alongside of these three men as they eat, and he listens in, and he's part of the conversation. He wants to have fellowship with these guys. And in the process, what does he end up finding out that he wouldn't have found out if he would have just let these three guys pass? Oh, by the way, your wife Sarah, she's going to have a baby a year from now. There's something about the hospitality that he shows these three men that invites him into something that he wouldn't have known if it hadn't been for the hospitality that he had shown. And for me, it's sort of a picture, because I've been trying to read some more about just sort of the Eastern spirituality, and they're really good at like the Trinitarian stuff of that we're invited into the life of the Trinity. And for me, that picture of Jesus, or of Abraham standing there while the three men are talking to each other, listening in on their conversation, hearing what they're up to, in many ways, I think that's a picture of when you think about we're invited into the life of the Trinity, that we're invited to be the ones who are standing alongside and hearing as they speak to each other and talk about what's going on. I mean, if that's something you're interested in, I invite you to do some more reading of some of the Eastern Orthodox people, because they're really good at that Trinitarian, that we're invited into the life of God and not just to learn about God. So, back to the sermon. So what is it that you are missing out on by not showing hospitality to God? I mean, Abram didn't even know that this was God, but he was just someone who was in the habit of wanting to show hospitality. That really in prayer, we're not here to bring our laundry list to God, but we're here to show hospitality to God. That we're here to actually give God access to speak things to us that we wouldn't hear if we hadn't taken time to show hospitality to God. So in your prayer time, like Penny was saying, do you actually see your prayer time as a time of showing hospitality to God, to listen in on what God is saying to you? I invite you to do that if that's not part of your prayer time. Then going to our New Testament reading. Mary and Martha, and you know who their brother is? Lazarus. They're friends of Jesus. It's sort of like when Jesus is passing, it's like when you have friends, when they pass through Oklahoma City, they stop and visit you. Mary and Martha and Lazarus were the ones that when Jesus passed through Bethany, after coming through Oklahoma City and 4 acres, he would stay and visit them. So basically, they're friends of Jesus. But we see that when Jesus comes close, Martha kicks into servant mode. That when Jesus comes to visit, even though she's a friend of Jesus, the only way she knows how to relate to him is as a servant. So she goes into the kitchen. But what does Mary do? Does Mary kick out of friend mode into servant mode? No, Mary says, I'm his friend primarily. So primarily, I'm going to sit as close to him as possible because he doesn't pass through town all the time. So I'm going to be a friend to him while he's here. If Mary wants to be a servant to him, or Martha wants to be a servant to him, she can go ahead and do that. And Martha's not happy about that. But what does Jesus say? Jesus says to Martha, you know what? When I'm coming through town, I'm not actually just looking for servants. I'm looking for friends. And I'm sort of glad that Mary figured that out and she decided to come and sit down and listen to what I had to say. So, as we think about the way that we relate to God, are we primarily, do we kick into servant mode? Do we kick into student mode? Or do we actually learn how to kick into friend mode? To be the one who actually slows down and says, it's not what I learned intellectually, it's not what I'm told to do so that I can behave in a certain way, but it's that I actually am able to slow down and listen to what Jesus has to say. So, as I think about where we're going as a church, that yes, Jesus does come to be a teacher. He says, you don't know what the Father's like, let me teach you. So he teaches us about the Father, he teaches us about the kingdom. And it's good that he comes to teach us. Jesus is also the servant. He says, if you want to be great in my kingdom, you're going to serve. Serve each other, and you're going to understand why I'm here. I didn't come to be served, but to serve. So yeah, Jesus comes to be the teacher that gives us information. Jesus comes to be the one who shows us how to be servants. But I think that his primary goal is to be more than the one who tells us what to believe and what to do. But I think his primary goal is to help us to experience friendship with God. So what does he say? I don't call you servants anymore because a servant doesn't know what the master is doing. The servant is just busy doing things for the master and really is left outside. I call you friends because I want you to be sitting, I don't want you in the kitchen. I want you to be sitting at my feet, and I want you to be listening to what I'm saying because I'm here to share with you what the Father is doing. Maybe to tell you you're going to have a baby a year from now, or maybe to tell you that there's something that I'm calling you to do. But ultimately, when we come to church, our number one goal is not to be a student of a teacher. Our number one goal is not to be a servant of a master. Our number one goal is to be a friend of God. Our number one goal is to take time to sit down and just spend time in God's presence. Because our salvation is not what we know about God. Our salvation is not what we do for God. But in our reading from Colossians, it says the mystery of what God has been up to is Christ in you. That's who we're hosting. We're hosting the presence of God on the inside. We're not learning about some distant God, and we're not doing something to please some distant master. So in your prayer time, take time to show hospitality to the Christ in you. And he'll cause you to know things about God more than a teacher could ever teach you. And he will cause you to be motivated to love and serve your neighbor in ways that the best taskmaster couldn't force you to do. But it's because of Christ in you. Amen.